Welcome to What Grows. It's a podcast where we play with the connection between who we are and how we grow. I'm your host, Noella Mashi. So, Alyssa, we first met as childhood friends in Papua New Guinea, and you're now
Yeah.
based in Australia, and I'm in the US. And when we reconnected after decades over email, it was like no time had passed because I don't know, there's just something about the connection. I still feel kind of seen and understood by you, even though our cultures have kind of gone in completely different
Yes, I
directions.
know. It definitely feels like we just picked up where we left off kind of thing. Like, you just come over and we had like a million prank phone calls and
Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten about those.
oh, I remember
um,
many,
and,
too many.
something about that time that's still true from our communication since is like you are one of the smartest people I know, and you're also one of the most creative. And from what you've shared with me after years of being told to follow your talent and monetize it, advice that led you down some wrong turns, some painful turns, you're now studying to become the therapist you wish you'd had. And you're focusing on decolonial approaches that honor your full identity as an Australian with Papua New Guinean and Chinese roots. And it's someone and this is very relatable to me, who's felt like a footnote in Western centric education systems. You're now committed to approaches that center healing from within and from the ground up. And you're teaching your children that creativity can be joyful without becoming a source of their worth. And through your experiences with mental health, with receiving a life changing diagnosis, and the changes that come with birthing and raising two boys, you've learned some hard lessons and you're on a really interesting path. So I am so excited to talk with you. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of scary hearing it all kind of put that way. Like it's just like, oh fuck, is that me? Oh, sorry, swears.
That's fine.
I'm the worst parent for that, but I was little kid. But yeah, um, yeah, it's a lot, I guess. I think it's something that I think a lot of people like us who come from like, you know, different cultures and have to live in, as I suppose strangers, like I think they're the sort of things we have to do to sort of get to like the baseline of where everyone else is.
Uh-huh.
You have to work through so much internally um, to sort of realize where you're different and where you kind of are the same with others, I think. Um,
Yeah. And even acknowledging that baseline because it's so invisible to,
it is.
it's like, why am I not quote unquote normal? And my
Mm,
definition of normal is not something I've ever explored.
yeah, I think it's sort of something that comes out a lot in my studies, which like it gets frustrating sort of being taught from a Western perspective, but it also is really informative because it confirms where this baseline is. And sort of now that I feel quite comfortable knowing that I'm not there and that I don't have to be, it's sort of something that I always use as a reference. And I do sort of try to bring attention to be like, well, this is the baseline in like for this population. Like we don't, not this isn't the whole world,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
so and it's sort of like a perspective that I try to incorporate even just as a parent, when we're watching things or when we're reading stories, I always make sure to be like, this is true here, but that's not the case for like, where we come from or where, other people we may know or other people we even just watch, this isn't,
Uh-huh.
this is told to, you know, I try to make my kids aware of like when you're watching something or reading something, like the, it's all crafted and it's like, they have an audience in mind and it's not usually people like me or even you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that awareness. I mean, okay, so I'm kind of going into the deep end. I do want to kind
that's
of
fine.
rewind
Sorry.
as well, but
Yeah.
no, 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 this is good. It's just it's reminding me of something that I've been trying to understand lately around AI and workforce development, which is the space that
Ah,
I'm
yeah.
in, and just how these models have been trained on data sets from people that don't represent us. And so what is that
Yes.
definition of normal, and what are the responses we're
Yes.
getting, and how well are they tailored to our needs and context is a
You know,
huge
it's
question.
I'm not sure if you came across this study, but, like, I found a really interesting paper on exactly that, that, and, this is I sort of spend way too much on, like, very basic assignments and end up sort of going on these huge tangents, but I sort of, like, gain so much knowledge. But this, researcher had actually just said that is like, you know, artificial intelligence and all of that, like, knowledge, like, these connectionist models are based on a Western concept of intelligence. They, like, talk about as well the history of what intelligence is and how, you know, Benet created it, but then it was actually used to sort of keep Black people from, sort of being, well, I think admitted into the army, right? And so, you're sort of basing all of these things on, like, these really, like, exclusionary things. And then so we create these entire systems, like AI, that are premised on these kind exclusionary things. And it sort of is like that's kind of why, we have to question if what we're being told by a large language model is the truth. But that's because
Mhm.
that's sort of all from a Western perspective. And they kind of go into, like, there's so many other things and other ways of knowledge that could inform this, like, intelligence,
Mhm.
that are missing from the global South.
Yeah, yeah, it's terrifying, and then because that's kind of a foundation from which more knowledge is created and more tools and more processes, we end up several layers out wondering why this doesn't work for us or it doesn't work for certain populations, and feeling like it's the fault of the population as opposed to the fault of the system.
Yeah, but I guess that's like how these systems are built. You sort of just keep building and building and building on them. And then when you're like, well, you know, you have sort of people coming from, like, different sort of backgrounds and have, like, a different perspective. Like, when they sort of point out, like, this is the problem, and they're like, well, it's like, how we can't fix it. What are you going to do? Rebuild it?
It's too
It's
late.
like
Yeah.
they've made so many layers that it then becomes, unsolvable. Um,
Mhm.
but I think that all comes from just people having too much faith in these things that they're like, you know, that they're foundational, like that they're solid entities. I don't know how to best put that. It's just kind of they can be changed and not set in stone.
Yeah, yeah, it does really feel like, okay, we all need to go with this because this is the fact right now on the ground in terms of how to use AI and everyone needs to integrate it. I've read proposals of like, honestly, it sounds kind of scary. It sounds like a second wave, bringing religion to Africa, bringing AI to Africa, and how can
Right?
we
Yes,
integrate
it
it
is.
into
It is
everything
all that.
everyone does and save them using AI? And it's
Yes.
just,
Yes,
yeah, it's
it's
a little cringe.
very savior. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, you know, having sort of lived in or like had to sort of exist in all these different spaces makes you realize that they're all kind of artificial, that they all have their funny little definitions of, like, y- how you should live your life or these benchmarks for life. And so I think, at least for me, it sort of gives me a bit more perspective now, where people kind of just assume that the life they live is sort of like how it has to be, you know
Mm. Can you tell me more about that? Because when I think of the different spaces that you've lived, I think about career and how you were, in the creative space, and I think about now, in psychology, but I also think about countries and different
Mm,
cultures.
yeah.
Like what do you think, I don't know how to phrase this, but like what do you think is like true across board for you versus what have you had to shed?
I think what's true across board is just really basic things like intuition. Like, if something feels right or not. But what you're measuring that on is kind of the more artificial things. And I think sort of zooming out from just like career and, choices of study and things like that, it's sort of like, I think about sort of having a Chinese father and a Papua New Guinean mother, like the code switching there. I even have to change sort of language I use. My mannerisms change. How I even like, how you address adults changes. And then you have the Western one that's like, I had to when I went to boarding school in Australia, then that was just a huge, huge shock, adjusting to that. And I didn't think it was going to be that big a shock for me because I was like, oh, I go to Australia on holidays, like, but sort of having to then exist and communicate and try to be understood. That also required another switch. And even sort of when we were at school, like going from like Australian schools to like our American school, that was also a huge code switch. So um, I think it's sort of all those kind of, I like to think, artificial kind of, these rules for living, rules of engagement, being aware of that has sort of made me a little bit, I don't know, a little bit, I don't get too bothered by that sort of stuff. And I sort of tend to like, look for commonality in those real kind of, yeah, those intuitive, those kind of like emotional things, like things that feel right or wrong. I think those are the real
Yeah.
things.
My goodness, yes. I mean, that resonates with me so much. First of all, when it comes to people, for better or worse, I will have a conversation with someone and really get a sense of I've connected with this person and this is what I value about them, or I can't see past them. There's too much, like they're putting up a shield, and it's
Yeah.
just something in my body that senses that.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you get that
Yeah.
too?
That's definitely how I sort of the where I either click or not. Because if someone's too like, I sort of I have very little interest in what people do because I sort of look at it as it's it's your job. You don't have to love it, but you should be interested in it. And like, but this isn't you. It maybe says something about you, but if you want it to, not everybody has the privilege to sort of do those sorts of things. Um, so for me, if that's all I get from somebody, then I sort of have the feeling that we don't really want to have a conversation. And I think, you know, being having sort of confirmation that I'm autistic, it sort of really clicks because it's like I have this like like really strong hatred for like small talk, and if that's all we're going to do, then I'm just like we're not having a bye. Nice knowing you.
Yeah.
I can get quite curt. Yeah.
Yeah. I really don't like small talk either, and for the longest time, it was honestly I felt like it was a weakness, but I think it can be a strength. I mean, sometimes people are relieved to be able to cut through all of that noise and just really talk, you know? And sometimes
Yes.
they're not, and then they're not your people, and that's okay
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Well, that I've always had that like feeling. I was like, we don't like. I don't have to be friends with everybody. You don't have to like me. I don't have to like you. That's fine. That doesn't that doesn't equate to hatred. It's just like whatever. Like you
Mm, mm.
you can find your people. I'll find mine. We can be
And
at peace.
yeah, exactly, and I'd love to talk about that in the context of not what kind of what you're studying, but also just like your lived experience. You mentioned
Mm,
having a therapist that you really clicked with, and then some that
yes.
you really didn't.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so what's interesting to me there is like presumably they all had kind of similar incentives and types of training and whatever. So, what really is the difference then between a good therapist versus an ineffective therapist? Is it that they're bad therapists or just not the right fit? What did that look like for you?
I think it really I have had friends tell me horror stories, so I think, yes, there are bad therapists out there. I thankfully haven't had them. Um, but for me, it was that it wasn't. the right fit. And I think it, you know, there have been some that um, were fine, but I think it also was because, when at all these different points when I've sort of reached out and needed therapy, my needs were quite different. And I think it related to, all these different parts of me that sort of needed, some guidance or some support. And so, there have been times when it didn't matter that I didn't have a therapist that sort of met me at my, for my cultural needs, because that wasn't the issue. My first therapist who, is like I suppose it's like I don't know, first love or something, to, yeah. And so, she was a brown person. She was young. She was really close to my age. It was quite sisterly. It felt um, really nurturing. But, I don't think like now that wouldn't be like what she gave me then wasn't isn't what I need now. And so it's kind of, I think it's, having, you don't have to be fully aware, but just sort of following that gut instinct, again, like your instincts with that. If it doesn't feel right, you're right. If it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. You don't have to like bargain with yourself or argue against yourself. So um, i- yeah,
Well, tell me about you. I mean, you mentioned kind of being the therapist you wish you had. Like, what does a good therapist, a culturally aware therapist, look like?
I think it's listening, and also you hear what people say, and then you also kind of use your lived experience to sort of see what's beneath, because people can come to you and maybe be struggling with things at work, and like things not connecting, and you know sort of talking about all these things that are happening on the surface that they might not be aware is like, this is why, you may have these communication issues because, you or you may be sort of like struggling with your boss, but that may come from a cultural place where you kind of respect your elders, but you need to sort of remember that you're not in this cultural space, so you can assert boundaries. You can say no. Like, I think it's sort of being a good listener, but also knowing where those other tensions may be coming from, which may not be the textbook things you're taught, in the course.
And how different is that from yeah, how different is that from personality? Like, I can completely relate to specifically not speaking up when I needed to in a work context because I thought that would have been inappropriate, and in fact had coaching from my couples therapist on how to have a conversation with my boss because she's like, "No, this is America. Like, this no, that what are you doing? That you need to tell her exactly what you need," you know? And I kind of and I think this is part of the I don't know, brainwashing that happens when frankly, when you live in a multicultural environment, is you think that your stuff is just your personality because you're like, "I was raised the
Yes.
same as everyone else." So,
Yes.
it's just but there are so many subcultures, especially within an international community like like we experience. And it may seem like that sort of community gives you great exposure, which it absolutely does, but it also kind of blinds you to your personal needs and differences culturally.
Yeah. It's funny because there's a lot of words that we use that we sort of like, just in terms of personality or like personality types that like, I mean, I'm yet to get to the unit, but what I found is like a common thing is that we kind of take them for granted, and they're again used as these baseline things. And when you look at studies that look at populations that don't include that aren't Western, some of these constructs aren't there, or they're they're different. So I I think it's also that is like you attach yourself, like if we're just talking about personality types, you may attach yourself to an archetype that we have been told exists, and but it may not actually be you, because you are not part of you you're not actually part of that sort of group that was studied
Mhm.
to create these sort of constructs, right? Like
Mhm.
you're you're not the intended audience.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, and I think about this in the context of raising children, and I think there's
Mm,
something that you and I might have in common, and briefly discussed over email is just, there's so much richness in culture. Like, I'm trying to teach my child how to speak Swahili, and that falls all on me. I'm the only one that can
yes.
speak it in the house, and I'm not even that great. Like, I don't write in Swahili. I can, but I'm not great at it. And so it's just like constant second guessing of, am I doing a good enough job of
And no, I
integrating
get it.
her into where she belongs? What's that
Yes.
journey been like for you when all the resources around you are not quite intended for your kids?
It is a struggle. It's like, honestly, I still don't really have uh, a clear path for what to do there. It's just, and I've really tried, probably like really got out of my comfort zone to try to like make some Papua New Guinean connections at least. Like, because it's like for the Chinese side, I have nothing. I just it's but at the same time, there are books about being Chinese. There's book like you can buy dumplings, like, but the Papua New Guinean culture, it just seems like my kids don't even like. It's hard to. It might as well be the North Pole, 'cause there's no, and there's more books on the North Pole than like for kids than Papua New Guinea. So it's just it like the struggle is real. Yeah, like
Mm.
it's um I try to sort of incorporate like Tokpisin at least, because my mum's language is like I am I think it's called like a passive speaker or something. I can understand it, I can't speak it, and so it's like that for me. When like my oldest one was born, I really struggled with it. It felt like a huge, like it's a lot of responsibility, and I sort of had a little bit of validation when I was seeing a psychologist who was it's a beautiful practice, but they are only kind of um, well all their clients are black and brown people, and so she just had said, the thing is, it's like it is a community thing. That's where we come from, and so it isn't actually your responsibility, and it's important to try to find some community connections, because you shouldn't feel like you need to do this on your own, and any little bit is something. So
Mhm.
it's yeah, but it is hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, with all of the other stuff, like teaching them to read, keeping them clothed and fed, and like whatever, getting them to bed, it is the easiest thing, at least for me, to fall by the wayside. But long term, strategically, like that is such an important thing to build. And I agree that, I mean, community is so critical for that. And I'm in this weird space where, okay, so in the countries that I've lived in, I haven't quite been able to connect with my East African community because I've still felt like an outsider, especially
Yes.
when I'm outside of my country. It's like,
Yes.
well, why do you speak Swahili with an accent? Why is your hair a little bit softer? Like what? Just all of these questions that are othering in a way that's way more hurtful than if it were
Mm,
anyone else kind of asking me these questions. So historically avoided my own communities for that
yes.
reason.
I completely relate. Like I that is me. I think like, that's kind of why I was like I had to go outside of my comfort zone a little. Um, but I think like at least for me, the othering. So part of the like unraveling of all this like discomfort or like othering in my life came from like all these things that I thought were, cultural kind of clashes were all down to my autism. It was kind of like I do I can mask well enough to sort of go through conversations or find things to connect with people, but there's just sort of just this internal kind of knowledge that I process things differently, that I how I read things are quite differently, and that kind of really was or like is at the root of how I can feel so different in every single, you know, culture that I or like, space that I exist. I think, but these ones that you biologically come from, they sort of hurt more because you're told that's who you are, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, tell me about that autism diagnosis, like the journey leading up to it and how things have changed for you since you got it.
I it's funny, I sort of it really started when my oldest was really little, and we sort of were like, I don't know, something's like something's kind of not quite right, and we'd sort of looked, everyone sort of warns you about it, like it's like this horrible thing, and but they sort of, they're just like these really basic dot points. It's like, "Well, do they make eye contact? Do they, turn around when you say their name?" And it's like, "Yeah, he did those things." And, we'd mention it and they'd be like, "No, no, no, he's like ticked the boxes for these like really basic checks." And, it just kept going until he got to the end of kindergarten, and then I really started pushing. Like, my brother got diagnosed with ADHD, and I was like, "Oh, well, then I must have it because we are so alike. Like, if he's got it, then I have it." And then I was like, "Well, that must be what my kid has. Must be ADHD." And so we started going down this path, and which was it has been a long path, like struggle, but filling out forms basically about like what they do. And I was just looking at these things that like were markers of it, and I was like, "What? This is all me. I did this is like I actually tick more of these boxes," kind of thing. So then I was like, "Okay, like we gotta pursue this." And so basically, that's how it came about, And I sort of got my diagnosis before my child did, and now my husband's got his diagnosis, so it's sort of, we're just sort of waiting for our little one to join the flock.
Yeah. And so, yeah, how has that changed kind of the way you maybe structure your day, the way you kind of live knowing that you
I
have an autism diagnosis?
Yeah, so I mean, it's autism and ADHD, which like for me, and we like that was basically everyone so far, for our whole family, autism ADHD. It it was hugely validating. It just made so much sense of the things I enjoy and the things that are hard for me, and made sense of like my coping mechanisms. Like, it kind of was that like final mystery, and obviously I'm still learning, but it's just been kind of at the root of so many things that are me. It's sort of like I can really understand now how people sort of talk about, when you talk about autistic people, you say autistic people because you're not a person with autism, you are an autistic person, and it's like it, yeah, it all just makes so much sense.
I I mean, that's yeah, I can imagine just, like, understanding yourself is a huge part of accepting, and I think that's yeah, that's been something that I finally again, just like my husband and the therapist were like, you need to do something," and so about 3 weeks ago, started antidepressants, and
Oh,
yeah, I've been feeling a lot better. Like, it's not like I wake up thrilled every day, like, the dose is good, but
yes.
just way better thoughts, less dissociation. But these are all things that it's very easy in my culture, at least, to like sweep under the rug. It's like you
Yes.
need to just push on, or you're having a bad day or whatever. Like, and it feels, and I still honestly I'm struggling with this. It feels too intense to say I have depression. It's fine for me to say I am taking antidepressants for this season in my life. And I don't think that that's anything to do with the actual, like, facts on the ground. I think it's to do with my stigma around things like that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think coming round to language that feels true for you is a very personal thing. I mean, there's a lot of people who still say, I have autism or, you know, things like that. So I think it's more about what it means for you. Um, but yeah, the stigma is, I think, also just a really, really big part in sort of even starting to go on to even question how you feel about it. Um, I suppose, like with something like depression, it is something that, at least for some people, it maybe is right, the right language that you
Mhm.
to think about it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think even for me, it is the right language. It's just language I'm not accepting yet for whatever reason.
Yeah. I think the funny thing about mental health, mental illness, it is really, really stigmatized. It's still not the same. You can't just say, "Oh, I have a headache." It's like it's still something you have to, speak in whispers kind of about. I find it with some of my husband's family, and they're white Australian. It's like um, they some of them can't even say psychologist out loud. They have to mouth it. So it's just um, it's a strange thing, I suppose, cross culturally.
Yeah. We'll get there. I mean, the previous generation was probably a little worse than ours, and ours is a little bit better, and the
Yeah,
next
I
one
mean,
will be
there's
better.
glimmers of hope. Like, I think my dad's pretty open to learning in his own way. I explained what our diagnoses, like, as a family means and all the, like, variations and stuff, and he just visited, actually, and he actually said as he was leaving, he's like, "Oh, maybe I should get diagnosed," because he was starting to be like, "Oh, that I have that difficulty, that," and he's like, "I think it might explain why some things are so hard for me," and I was like, "Oh,
Mm,
wow, see,
that's
there's hope,"
huge.
It's like, it's not just a generation, it's just, down to the
Yeah.
individual, I think.
Yeah, you're right, you're right. Okay, so here's a question that I usually ask at the very beginning, and I just didn't
Oh,
because we jumped
sorry.
straight into it, and I love it.
Yeah.
Uh, if you could give your life a title, like it was a book, what would it be?
God. Um, see, I that's really hard, Bella. That was way harder than all the deep dives.
Yeah, because I think it's like it kind of like tries to push you to summarize a very rich and complex, nuanced life into like a phrase, which is not
Oh,
possible. But it's always
yeah.
fun to see what themes come up as people think out loud and process it.
God. Okay. Well, I mean, this is really hard because my whole life I feel is just Simpsons quotes. So it's just kind of like, it's like if I had to capture my life in a sentence, it'd just be the wrong thing. It's just, I guess, you may have misunderstood me.
I love that in so many ways.
Yes,
And
it's.
I'm assuming that speaks to kind of the AU/ADHD diagnosis, but also the cultural differences. Is there something else you're thinking about when you say that?
I suppose just it's like it has been a common theme, I think, in my life in, like, every aspect, just kind of socially. Yeah, it's, yeah, just yeah, that sort of painfully common theme of always being like, "Oh god, I didn't mean it that way."
Mhm. I I wanna ask you what your approach is to making friends as an adult. When we're kids, you're in the same class, whatever, you get chucked together, but as an adult, you can be a lot more discerning about that. I have very intense, like, I feel like this person is going to be my friend versus, I don't know, we'll play it by ear. I have been wrong. 1 or 2 times there's been people I haven't appreciated at first glance, and then later I've just, like, fallen in love with, but that's rare. Um, how are you connecting and being understood by people outside of your family?
The funny thing is, and I suppose lately haven't made too many friends like this but, um, most of my adult friends have all sort of turned out to be ADHD as well. So it's sort of
Oh.
like, I think it's just kind of, you see all these, like, I think, as when you do parenty things and you see everyone just being like, I guess everyone's either wrapped up in their small talk or they're just being like too loud. And I'm just like, oh, go away. And then there's the other person also being like in the corner recoiling or something. Then you're like, oh, yeah, you. Like, and
Yeah.
then you just like have this big conversation about things that, like, you just go into places that people aren't super comfortable talking about. So it feels really natural, I think. I think the only problem, like, I don't really believe it's that hard to make friends as adults. I think it's just finding the right ones. You know, I think the difficulty is trying to make friends with people that aren't right for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, and the more self-awareness and understanding of yeah, you have, the easier it is to to filter out. Um,
Yeah, or just kind of sort of trusting your gut again. It's like I think I've always kind of gone with that gut feeling of just like I have a friend who always said, like, if I was around someone I didn't like, I had the bad smell face, which, like, again, is like I think an autistic thing, but I'm like, oh, like it's very intense. So it's just like, yeah, I don't have to be fully aware of it, but it's like it's there. So let's, you know, believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Okay. So, I guess I'm trying to I'm just to wrap up, like, the last few questions, like, one is about the future, like, when you think about yourself and the way you wanna raise your kids and grow your family and what you wanna contribute to the world, the people around you, your community, like, what is the best case scenario of that? What does your wildest dreams of that look like?
I think it's for me, it's I suppose contributing to research that shows that there are other perspectives.
Mm, mm. That's wonderful, and there's so many different ways that that could manifest. Well, I have loved catching up with you. Thank you for making time to do this and trusting me with this. This was awesome. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm also always looking for guests who enjoy meaningful conversations. If that sounds like you, please send me a message and let me know what you'd like to talk about. I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening.